All right, how many of you consider yourselves liars? I know, that's kind of harsh, right? Now, how many of you ever massage the truth a little bit? You ever do that? So my session is on authenticity in the workplace, and one of the things that's good for us to take a look at when we're talking about authenticity is sometimes where and why and how it can be difficult. So as Christine mentioned, I wrote a book on authenticity called Be Yourself, Everyone Else Is Already Taken. And the book came out about 5 years ago. And I live in California in the Bay Area. And right after the book came out, the book came out on a Monday. We launched it. We did some things online. I did a few events, some media stuff. But I actually hadn't been in a bookstore. So at the end of that week, I went down to the local Barnes & Noble near where I live. Wanted to go in the store and make sure they had the book. And what my publisher had told me was not only was Barnes & Noble supposed to carry the book, but they were going to be featuring it up front. So I go in the store and I'm looking for it and I don't see it. And I'm getting kind of stressed out, like, where is it? And I was going to go ask someone, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. In the store, they had kind of a circular display in the middle, and it was for all the new releases, and mine just happened to be on the back side. That's why I couldn't see it. So I go over to it, and I pick it up, and it's the first time I see it in a bookstore, and I'm standing there, admiring my own book. It's kind of a proud moment, and then I start to have this conversation in my head, like, should I buy one? Now, I know that sounds kind of narcissistic and self-absorbed, right? And it is, but here's what I had learned. It was my second book. When my first book came out, some of my mentors in the publishing world had told me this that I didn't know, is that essentially the books in the store, they're on consignment. Meaning if no one buys them, they send them back. So what they told me, Mike, it's all right, especially when it first comes out. You can pick up a copy or two in the store, sort of help the cause. And I had done that a couple times in my first book, but this is now my second book, and I was feeling like this is kind of obnoxious. So I debate for a while in my head, and then I decide, the heck with it. It just came out. I'm excited. I'm going to buy one. So I pick up the copy, and I get in line. And as I'm standing in line, I tell myself when I get to the front, I'm going to tell the person at the front, it's my book, it just came out, I'm kind of excited. Anyway, as I get closer, I'm getting more self-conscious, right? Anyway, I go to the front, I put the book down on the counter. Before I can say anything, the woman behind the counter says to me, oh, we've been selling a lot of these. I say, really? And then she asked me a question, totally threw me off. Should you see this guy on TV or something? Because I had done a couple local TV interviews, and I don't know why her question sort of baffled me. And here's what I said. No, he's a local author. I just want to support him. That's what I said, right? I don't know if this ever happened to you. As it was coming out of my mouth, I'm like, what is that? And I'm standing there mortified. I can't believe what I said. I can't even recover and say anything else. The woman has no idea it's my book, but she's obviously looking at me weird because I'm looking at her weird. All I could do is reach into my wallet to pull out my credit card with my name on it. And I pay for the book really fast, and I run out of the store, and I'm literally standing in front of the Barnes & Noble looking at my book going, I wrote a book on authenticity, and I just lied to that woman. That's how it happens, right? It's not like we wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to lie to people, I'm going to deceive them. But in the course of our day, in the course of our life, particularly in our working life, in our professional life, we have a tendency to massage the truth. And mostly it's not malicious. Mostly it's not malintended, but it starts to create problems for us in our relationships, in the work that we do. And one of the contexts of this conference, and Soren talked about it yesterday when we kicked things off, is that this conference is really about authenticity for all of us. How do we bring our personal life, our spiritual life, our personal practice, whatever that means for us, and integrate it with our work life? And everybody here, at some level, has a deep commitment to that. But it's one thing to want to be authentic, it's one thing to espouse to be authentic, and it's a whole other thing to actually practice it. Because authenticity, like mindfulness, and they're very related, is a practice. So we've been talking about it a lot over the last day and this morning, authenticity, but what does that actually mean? When you think of authentic, particularly authenticity in the workplace, what do you think of? Just shout out some things what does that mean to you? Walk your talk, honesty. Congruency, transparency, genuineness, consistency with values, showing up. Absolutely. So there's a lot of different ways we could describe it, and most of us sort of understand what it means. However, it manifests itself very differently, as you may notice. Right? How many of you notice authenticity in New York looks a little different than other places? Right? I'm from San Francisco. It looks different in San Francisco. I gave a speech actually at a conference a couple years ago. This was in San Francisco. I was speaking about authenticity, and after I get done, I'm in the back, I'm sitting at the table, and a woman comes up to me, she makes a beeline right over to me, and she gets right in my face, and she says, I'm authentic all the time. And she was like upset, right? And I was like, what's the problem? And she said, well, I've lost some jobs because of that. And I said, really? Now, I didn't know her, but I was getting a very strong sense of her in that moment. And I looked her in the eye and I asked her a question. I said, now tell me the truth. Is it authentic or obnoxious? And she was like, all offended. I said, hold on, sorry, I'm not trying to offend you. In fact, I'm not even attempting to judge you. I'm just curious, what do you think? And she said, well, maybe a little bit of both. I said, I appreciate the honesty. And I told her, I said, look, I don't know for sure, but I've been doing this for about a decade and worked with lots of different organizations and leaders and all different types of companies, big and small. And I said, I bet it was the obnoxious that got you fired, not the authentic. Because I said, in all my years of doing this, I've never had anyone say to me, you know what, Mike, we fired her because she was way too real. So authenticity is about realness. It's about genuineness. Right? And I always think of it like this on a continuum. This side of the continuum, phony, inauthentic. We all know what that looks like. We know what that feels like. It's not simply just lying or making stuff up. That may be one. It's being not in alignment with who we are. It's selling out on ourselves. It's at times not speaking up. It's not being true. And again, without judging ourselves, it's painful though, right? To be in that place. And it's not sustainable to build relationships from that place of phoniness. We see it in other people. I loved what Congressman Ryan was talking about because it's so easy for us. We judge politicians. We judge all kinds of people that we see. We judge leaders in organizations. He's not authentic. She's not authentic. We'll see it over there. But we also got to take a look within ourselves. And while we don't usually hang out too much in that inauthentic, phony place, we start to move along the continuum to a place in the middle, which is, this is where honesty lies. Now, honesty is good, right? Honesty is the best policy. We all know that. But how many of you in the course of your life, particularly in your business life, have ever had an experience where you've been honest and it's created a problem? And then someone said to you, don't be that honest. Oh, and then you start to learn. Okay, that's where we start massaging the truth. I'm supposed to be honest this way with my team. I'm supposed to be honest this way with my clients. I'm supposed to be honest this way with that person, but not with that person. We start trying to figure it out. And while it all makes sense, and we all do this intuitively or consciously, we kind of oscillate between phony and honest, and there's really not a lot of freedom, if we really look at it, between those two aspects of the continuum. A lot of organizations that I work with, when they bring me in, they say, Mike, we want to have more honest conversations. We want to have more difficult, we want to be more comfortable with difficult conversations. People are too passive aggressive. Or in some cases, like people are too blunt and straightforward. That's not often the case, but and I often say, well, we're hanging out on this side. What you want to do is move past honesty to this place of authenticity. And what's that? What that is, and it's very simple, but it's not always easy. We have to first and foremost remove our self-righteousness from our honesty. How many of you, like me, have lots of opinions? Lots of opinions? How many of you, like me, think your opinions are right? Yeah. It creates a problem. Congressman Ryan was actually just talking about this in a really beautiful way. And we see it in politics. We get very self-righteous about our political opinions. And look, we're entitled to them. We're passionate about them. There are serious problems in our country. There are serious problems in our world, in the organizations you work with or consult to or whatever the work you do. There are problems there. You have passionate opinions about those problems. That's fine. It's not about taking away your passion. Goldie was talking about it as well. It's not about that. But when we have that self-righteous piece, it separates us from other people. It's not conducive to building relationships. It's not conducive to creating empathy and compassion between human beings and even for ourselves. So we have to remove the self-righteousness, which is no small thing and not necessarily easy to do. And the other thing we got to do, and this one can even be more challenging at times, is add vulnerability. When you remove self-righteousness and add vulnerability to honesty, then you get to authenticity. Mark yesterday, how many of you here were yesterday when you saw Mark, the CEO of Aetna? How amazing and beautiful was that? And what Mark was doing, as he was sharing his story and sharing his perspective, from my perspective, first experience I ever had, I didn't know anything about him or what, I was blown away by the level of vulnerability and authenticity. And Soren spoke to it this morning, that came from him, absolutely, but it also came from us, because there's a space created here that makes it safe to be vulnerable. But the power of that, given the position that he's in, wow. That speaking that vulnerably, that authentically, I don't know about you, but I was moved. I was inspired, like, my goodness. That's what it looks like. So the question then we have to ask ourselves, and most of us, we're drawn to it. When people are being real and being authentic, you notice there's a quality about it that has us drawn to that, connected to that. When we express ourselves, when we live in a moment, because the thing about authenticity, as one of my mentors says to me all the time, and I so appreciate this feedback, he says to me all the time, Mike, the truth can't be rehearsed. It's an in-the-moment phenomenon. There's no such thing as an authentic person, because we have moments of authenticity and moments of inauthenticity all the time. They're authentic moments. Just like meditation is a practice, authenticity is a practice. What makes it difficult or challenging, though? In work, how many of you work for an organization, for a company? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you consult with or work with or practitioner that goes in and works with companies? Okay, and how many of you don't fall into either of those categories? Okay, so just think of your work life. Whether you work for a big company, a small company, whether you work for yourself, you're a consulting company, whatever you do, what makes it difficult or challenging in your professional life specifically to be authentic in the way that I'm talking about it? What makes that challenging? Fear. And what are we afraid of? Judgment. What else? Being misunderstood. Expectation. I'm supposed to be this. People expect this from me. I have this skill. I'm at this level. I've been doing it this long, right? What else? Business. Oh, busyness. Yeah, I'm busy. Look, I'd love to have an authentic conversation right now. I got to get some stuff done. Boom. Being rejected. Hurting feelings. Yeah. Rocking the boat. Making someone angry. Hearing no. Being seen. A lot of stuff gets in our way. And it's understandable. It's absolutely understandable that that stuff gets in our way. The thing we got to take a look at for ourselves, and this is where the courage comes in, this is where the vulnerability comes in, are we willing to step past that place where it's a little scary and be authentic anyway? Because that's what it takes. It's easy for us after the meeting to go debrief and talk about, here's what I wish I would have said, or here's what they should have said, or you go to the meeting and then you go to lunch and then you talk about what you really think. That's an easy conversation. The harder one is to have that conversation in the room. So I have a lot of experience of doing this and working with lots of different groups, and I've had some amazing stories and experiences, but instead of even sharing some of that, what I think I'd like to do is actually do an exercise that I often do when I come in and I work with leadership teams or deliver trainings, or even sometimes when I'm speaking to large groups, because the concept of authenticity is completely different than the experience of it. So you guys up for doing an exercise? Okay. So for this exercise, what you're going to need to do is just, if you're holding something or your phone or you're taking notes, just go ahead and put that stuff down. You don't need that. And what you'll also need specifically for this exercise, and this is even true for those of you standing in the back or sitting, a single partner. So pair up with someone. If you end up with like an odd number or a group of 3, raise your hand if you need a partner, and find someone else who's raising their hand and pair up with them. And you got me on time? Okay. Okay. Okay, everybody got a partner? If you need a partner, raise your hand. Anyone else need a partner? Over here? There's someone over here. Oh, you got him? Someone else? Who else needs a partner? Someone in the back? Over there? There's someone over there who needs a partner? Oh, you need partners? You don't want to be partners with each other? You sure? It'll work, I promise. I promise. It always works out. Okay, so everyone got a partner? You need a partner? Pick an A and a B with your partner. So, everybody got a partner? Pick an A and a B? Okay. Up to you. Who wants to be A? Who wants to be B? Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Okay, so you got your partner, you got your A and B. So I'm going to explain this, then I'll go ahead and do it, and then we'll do it all simultaneously. So the metaphor that I often use when talking about authenticity, very simple, very overused metaphor, but it fits really nicely, and that's the metaphor of the iceberg, right? So the tip of our little iceberg pops up above the surface. That's often who we show to the world, particularly at work. But down below the waterline, that's where we really are. The majority of who we really are is down there. And the process of being authentic and being vulnerable with other people is a conscious and deliberate process of lowering that waterline. Okay? So this exercise is designed to do that. Now what you're going to do in a moment, one of you is going to go first, and you'll have about a minute, minute and a half, it'll be pretty brief, to just repeat this phrase. If you really knew me, you'd know this about me. Okay? Now you can say whatever you want to say. I'm not actually asking for you to tell some story from long ago or your life story. It's really like in this moment right now, if I check in with myself, if you really knew what was going on inside of me, here's what's going on. And again, literally, say whatever you want. There's no right or wrong way. This is not like shock your partner time, okay? But I want to encourage you. I want to make one challenge and one request. My challenge is to see if you can allow yourself to step further out of your comfort zone than you normally would. Allow yourself to be vulnerable with this person, whether you know them or not. And the request that I have is that the person listening, you just keep the conversation you have with your partner right now to yourself. I'll give you a moment to talk about it after the two of you, but that you don't share what they share with you with anybody else. Can we all agree to that? Okay. And then we'll switch and the other person will go. Okay, so I'll go first. So let's see, if you really knew me in this moment, what would you know? If you really knew me, you'd know I'm super excited to be up here speaking to all of you. It's a huge honor for me. And I'm feeling excited, but also a bit intimidated. I never quite thought my life would evolve to a point where I would speak right after Goldie Hawn and Congressman Tim Ryan. So exciting and daunting simultaneously. If you really, really knew me, you would know that I love the work that I do, and one of the biggest challenges I have with my own work, or two of them I would say, one is just living true to what it is I talk about and I teach, which I'm constantly humbled by the fact that that isn't always in alignment. And also the fact that at times, like this week and last week, it puts me on the road, away from my family. And my wife and I have two little girls back home, so I'm super grateful for what my wife does, but also just mindful of the fact that I'm not there. And if you really, really, really knew me, you'd know that being in New York City, I love coming to this city. I started coming here when I was little. My mom used to take us, and it's kind of bittersweet for me. My mom passed away a couple years ago, so when I come here, I have a lot of really fond memories of the excitement, and I also have those moments of just missing her. When I used to be here, I'd always call her when I'd get here and tell her where I was, and she'd want to know all kinds of things, like, what are people wearing, right? So, those are some things, if you really knew me, right now, you would know. Now it's your turn. And person B, you're going to go first. Okay. Okay, person B, start to wrap up. And person B, go ahead and stop. Go ahead and stop. Now we're going to switch. Now we're going to switch. If you haven't already switched, go ahead and switch. Person A, if your partner really knew you, what would they know? Go for it. Switch. Switch if you haven't already switched. Okay, person A, start to wrap up. Okay, go ahead and stop. Go ahead and stop. Okay, so I'm gonna give you just one more minute. If for some reason you didn't have a chance to switch, or you ended up in a group of 3 and didn't find a partner, then the last person can go. You have another minute. If you both went, just take a moment to talk a little bit. If you want to say anything in response to what they said, or just what was it like to have that conversation. So just take another minute or so, finish up, or just kind of debrief a little with your partner, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, start to wrap up there with your partner. And go ahead and stop. Go ahead and stop. Okay. All right, so let's talk about that briefly. All right, so how many of you noticed that, while in some cases it may have felt a little awkward at first, how many of you noticed that felt good to have that conversation? Okay? How many of you noticed you could relate to what your partner was talking about? Now, you might have been able to relate to something specific they said, but even if it wasn't something specific, you could relate to the emotion of it, right? What happens when we start to have this conversation naturally, and it does not matter where I am when I have this conversation with people. Here in New York, back in San Francisco, anywhere else around the country, big company, small company, nonprofit, Fortune 500 company, halfway around the world, in Europe and South, it doesn't matter. We get down to a very basic human place, and when we get to that basic human place, what's naturally there is empathy and compassion. For ourselves and for other people. That's what shows up. And it's an in-the-moment thing. And what's really amazing about this is this little activity, very simple. Some mentors of mine years ago taught me this. And having this conversation, I have seen some incredible things come out of just this simple conversation. And whether it's at a big event like this and people just do it in pairs, or in a training session, but some of the most incredible stuff often comes out when I go and I work with a senior leadership team or a team of any kind, particularly when there's an issue or where there's some lack of trust or there's some fear, which is almost always the case no matter how effective the team is. Because all of a sudden you start to have this conversation, and what happens is, like Congressman Ryan was saying about the people across the aisle in Congress that he doesn't agree with politically, when you see other people as human beings, oh, they have kids. Oh, they have concerns. Oh, they have hopes and dreams. They have fears. They have ideas. All of a sudden, we lower that waterline, and now we can not only connect with each other more genuinely, but new ideas come out. This is where innovation comes from. This is where collaboration comes from, right? Mark yesterday was talking about, when he was talking to Soren, about collaboration being essential in everything, regardless of the level of leadership. And if we can get to that place where we're willing to be vulnerable. And a lot of times, by the way, and especially if you're sitting in this room, and it does not matter if you're in a big company, whatever position you have, or if you're a consultant or someone who works with organizations, whatever your role is, it doesn't matter. How do you show up in that moment? And a lot of times, again, for those of us in this room, we're often going to be the ones that have to go first. And that's scary, because not everybody follows. But there are so many situations that I go in myself, and I'm nervous, and my heart's racing, and I'm thinking, it might not work here, and I do it anyway. Because if I don't go first, they're probably not going to go as well. And it's not some arrogant ego like I have the best idea. No, it's like, let me be willing to go there and see if they follow. And a lot of times they do, and not always. But we'll live. And look, I'm not necessarily advocating that you go back to your company and you call a meeting with the CEO and say, if you really knew me. Now, you could do that, and if you CEOs like Mark, he'd be like, come on, let's go on a hike, or whatever. But there's lots of different ways to embody it. Listen to people. Ask questions. Be willing to make requests. Admit when you don't know stuff or need some help. There's all kinds of little ways that we start to build our own capacity for authenticity, created in the environment, and it's amazing what can happen. I'll share one final story just as an example of this, because I see some really amazing things. A few years back, I got invited to speak at an event, and it's a pretty big retail company. It was my first experience working with them. They were talking to me about doing some stuff, and then I got a call after we'd had an initial meeting, and they said, look, Bob, who actually is the president of one of the brands within this big organization, he's having a leadership meeting with just his directs and their directs. It's about 60 people, but it's like the kickoff for the year. And we would like for you to come in, Mike, and talk about appreciation. Another big piece of my work is around appreciation, employee engagement, sort of positive psychology stuff. But they said, can you do that? And I said, sure. They said, we got to tell you a few things about Bob. First of all, Bob is not a touchy-feely guy. So, Mike, we like what you do, but it's a little too touchy-feely for us. So could you do us a favor and really come in with a lot of that data and research you have about positive psychology and what makes, produces results, and talk about your sports background. I played baseball, so keep it very business specific and result oriented. I said, no problem. I said yes, because this was a big opportunity. I want to do a good job, right? So I prepare for it. I said, would you mind? Can I come a little bit early to the meeting so I can kind of meet some folks and sit in the back? And they said, absolutely. So I get there. And I'm meeting some people, and they also had me talk to Bob on the phone, and they were absolutely right. Bob was like a straight shooter, bottom line kind of guy, So I got the deal. I had my whole presentation ready. I was good to go. And I get to the event, and I'm sitting in the back of the room, and my intuition, everything in Mike is just saying, wow, they had just had a really bad year. It was when the economy was bad, and they just had a really rough year, and they were so stressed. And the voice in my head was like, these people need to cry. And then the other voice in my head was like, no crying, no crying. Right? It was literally Robbins, don't mess this up, man. This is a big opportunity. They're gonna and so I'm fighting. I'm sitting in the back for a couple hours as I'm preparing, and this fight is going on in my head, and I'm trying to breathe and do my own mindfulness practice, and but right? It was a big deal. I didn't want to mess this thing up. So I get up to give my presentation, and I'm talking about appreciation, and I'm going through some of the data and how it works and what happens and why it's important, and they're all leaders, and you got to appreciate people. And it was going fine, but something was missing, right? And for me, it was I was out of alignment with myself. And finally, I decided in the middle of it, you know what, this might be the one and only time I have to be in front of these people, and I might blow it, and Bob might get upset, and the guy, the VP of HR that brought me in is probably, I don't know. But I just shifted gears, and I had them pair up, and I had them talk about what was going on for them, and I had them talk about some things they appreciated in their lives personally, people they valued, and hey, I know it had been a rough year last year. What helped get you through? And we started to have that conversation. And all of a sudden, the conversation changed, and then right at the end, I was about to share a story that sometimes when I share this particular story, it's about my mom. It's a little emotional. I thought, wow, there was a lot. I could feel it. There was a lot of sort of pent-up emotion in the room. As I start to tell the story, literally 50 out of the 60 people in the room started crying. And it wasn't about the story. It was more about the moment, and the emotion started to flow, but not Bob. And so I get done with the story, And I'm the end. I'm the end, and Bob's going to come up and wrap the meeting up. And literally, Bob doesn't acknowledge me. He's got this really pained look on his face. I'm thinking, I blew it, right? Even though I could tell it resonated with the group. I sit down. Bob gets up, and he starts kind of pacing around, and he's like flustered. And he starts to tell a story about his mentor. The guy who was mentoring him right now, and he talked about the year and how rough the year had been, and how his mentor helped get him through. And he wanted to quit a couple times. And then Bob started to cry. And I still wasn't quite sure if that was good or not. And we get done, and the VP of HR runs over to me, grabs me by the arm, and pulls me out of the room. And now I'm thinking, I'm in trouble. And he looks me right in the eye, and he says, 4 years we've been waiting for him to show up like that. And he finally did it today. So I share this with you now because each and every one of us in this room has that opportunity to show up like that, to have that kind of impact. That's why we're here. That's what we want. And does it always work out? No. Is it scary? Yes. But do people want it, us included? Absolutely. That's the power of authenticity. Thank you.